Today's focus is the next section of the issue brief, past policy and program milestones. And here, entries for this, the bullet points here are going to be concisely describe any past relevant initiatives related to the topic. So I'm going to go through here a handful of slides and explain this a little bit more detail. The first question is, what's the difference between a policy and a program? The policy is typically a law, a regulation. At the local level, it's an ordinance. There's some other public policy codes and other things that we won't get into right now, but may show up in your research. But it's usually something on the books. It's formal. It's promulgated in one of those ways. Laws are done by the legislative branch. Regulations are put out by the executive branch. Ordinances are put out by the equivalent of the legislative branch in local government, which is the city council. Mayors, there's executive orders. There's a series of other policies that are of that nature. I cited two big ones, the Voting Rights Act, the Economic Opportunity Act, which was the war on poverty, just as two big examples. I'm going to give some other examples in a second here. Programs, by contrast, are specific activities seeking to address a need or opportunity, either for people or for places. So it's a jobs program is a program. It's something that's running, operating. A policy may be in this law, we want to fund it at a certain level, and there's a whole budgetary process. So policies often are, this is where they get the gray area gets a little bit unclear between, you can have a policy to fund a educational technology for public schools, to take Sam's issue, but the federal government, the administration could choose, or the Congress could choose not, when they do the budget process, not to request any money for it. So there are laws on the books for programs to be funded, and the budgetary process could lead that not to occur. So those are the two big differences in a simplistic way. And let me now give you a couple concrete examples. So the first example is a legislative milestone. That's the first thing I was just explaining. So significant law that authorizes new programs or marks a shift in policy or approach. And the example here is the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, signed into law by President Ronald Reagan. Your entries should have another sentence, at least, in their description than we have right here. You see here, we have the year, a dash, typically the law, in this case, a link to the law, so the reader could go find the law. And because it's an actual act and you can link to it, you don't need a footnote here. But you may actually also have a footnote here if you were finding that from a particular source. Now, you wouldn't have every single time there's a law related to homelessness in this instance. You'd have the significant ones. And what typically happens at the federal level anyway, is they pass a new law for the first time, and then they reauthorize it periodically and make shifts in policy. Some of those reauthorizations are significant and would mark a shift in policy or approach, and therefore should be part of your history. I don't think these are going to be, all of the nuances on this are going to be easy to find out just by reading websites. This is one of the areas where interviewing folks and potentially reading some books, if you can find some references like that, that would be helpful. Second category is a funding milestone. Major increases or decreases. So this is what I meant, as I said earlier. So I'll just give you an example. There's a proposal right now to triple the size of the AmeriCorps program. So it wouldn't be a new piece of legislation. It'd be a major increase in the budget that also may include an amendment to the legislation to shift the program in some way. So it'd be a combination of a little bit of a shift in direction, but certainly a major increase in funding. Should that occur, that would be a milestone. Right now, that would fall under, if you were talking about national service, would fall under proposed policy. It would be one of the categories of options that you might look at. This particular example is at the state level, there's a particular agreement to dramatically increase funding for permanent and transitional housing for homeless, mentally ill people in New York City way back in 1990. Third one is an evaluation milestone. I don't have one here for you, but some influential evaluation or assessment that shaped the understanding of the scope of the problem or the relative effectiveness of an important approach. The example here that comes to mind immediately is Head Start. Head Start was one of the War on Poverty programs. It started in New Haven as a single program. The research said it worked, and when they began to develop the War on Poverty, and they wanted to tackle, among other things, early childhood education, that became the model that was then put into legislation. So the research, there's been subsequent research about the impact of the Head Start program at a national scale across many, many sites. And that research is cited every single time there's a budgetary question about should we shrink or grow Head Start in this country. So if we were doing one on early childhood education, maybe some other topics related to poverty, children, youth, and families, that study would be a key milestone to put into the record so that, again, a reader coming in would understand some context for the current debate as we consider different options. Another one might be a significant book, a report, a study. Here, the example is the National Alliance to End Homelessness announced this is a plan, not a dream, how to end homelessness in 10 years. This is their report. This vision included strategies to end the problem by providing affordable housing and needed services, and just as important, by preventing homelessness from occurring in the first place. So there you see an ideal entry. You have a year, the name of the organization, a link, in this case, to the report. So you don't need an extra footnote because you're linking straight to the source, and a one-sentence description so that the reader doesn't just have to guess why that's a significant item. What was significant about this, from my experience, is before this, you really have not heard anybody talk about ending homelessness. It was as if homelessness was always going to be with us, and all we could do was help the homeless be a little more comfortable, maybe eventually get them a place to live. And this whole idea of having a 10-year plan, not a 2-year plan, which wouldn't seem realistic, but 10 years, in 10 whole years, we really could end homelessness in our city, in a given city. And this organization sponsored and helped nurture the development of local alliances to end homelessness all across the country. And they all were tasked with developing their own local 10-year plans. And if you're looking at homelessness in your city or in your state, this would be a study and a key milestone at the national level that had a very clear influence at the local level. At the local level, there may be particularly local level, organizational program milestones. So at the legislative and funding level, that's often national, could be state and local as well. But there are organizations in your community working on the issue that you're concerned with. There may be organizations working on the issue that you're concerned with. It may be that when that organization started is it is a key milestone. When did the soup kitchen or the food pantry open in your community? Has it been there forever? Has it been there for 50 years? Has it been there for 6 years? On campuses, if you're doing student hunger or student food insecurity, for instance, college student food insecurity, I think I said this the other day, the on-campus food pantries servicing college students is a relatively new phenomenon. So if that was a topic you were covering, you would want to know when those began. So some of these are going to be at the local level. These examples here are at the local level. 1987, Trenton, New Jersey, Mayor Arthur Holland appoints task force on the homeless and hungry. Now, what's wrong with this particular entry is that there's not a footnote or a link to that task force. Now, it's an old task force, so I think we would want a footnote to identify, to be sure we knew when that happened and a reader could go find the original source. So somebody editing this policy brief would have to go find that footnote that's the kind of thing that you may have to track down through interviewing folks. Because 1987, the websites weren't what they are today. In fact, there weren't websites in 1987. So there's another couple examples here. Mid-80s, Trenton Salvation Army opens. That wouldn't be a good enough entry. The Trenton Salvation Army opened at a particular year. And again, we want to link to the current Salvation Army website, maybe to the page that gives the history of the organization. I have a footnote for that. So those are the key areas for looking at policy and program milestones. There's legislation, funding, evaluations, major ones, reports and studies and books on a topic, and organization and program milestones. Those are the 6 areas that you would be typically looking for milestones.